Have you ever had a player in Football Manager that has great attributes on paper, but then in the in-game engine, they just don't live up to expectation? Or the opposite, a player that doesn't look great on paper, but in-game is absolutely tearing it up for your side? Well, there's a reason for this, and it might have been under your nose the whole time without you realizing. It's something that you can actually learn and utilize yourself and put onto certain players to make them play better, and you can have more of these overpowered beasts in your team. Now, this is something that we did cover a while ago on a previous Football Manager, and a lot of you guys did really get some use out of it and really enjoyed the video. So we're going to talk about it today, and the concept that we're covering is none other than player traits. Now, to some of you, that might be an unknown phrase that you know nothing about, and to some, you might think, oh, I know what player traits are, I'm fine. Well, stick with us in this video, because I'm sure you will learn something in the next 10 minutes or so. We're going to cover when you should use certain player traits, effective ones, and equally ones that aren't so effective, how to set up your tactic to get the best use out of these traits. If you watch this video, I really think you will find some benefits in your save. So with that being said, don't forget to like the video if you do enjoy or get any use out of it. Subscribe as well to the channel for more Football Manager videos like this, as well as tactics and Wonder Kids, and comment down below your favourite player trait in Football Manager, or if you just want to help us in the algorithm, let us know what you had for dinner, let us know what team you support, let us know your favourite Wonder Kid, anything like that. It's always great to get involved with you guys. Now, we're here with Crystal Palace a few years in, and this is the example save that we're going to use for today's video. This is part of a rebuild that I've done on my own channel. Now, this save in particular was handy because I've had the two different sides of the coin with player traits in this save, both for positives and negatives, and today I'm going to show you how to look out for the good ones and the bad ones and what to do. But let's start with the basics. What are player traits? Well, if we take a player like Mark Gurhey, for example, he has his attributes that you can see on screen, and he also has the player trait of bring ball out of defense. Now, what this means is Mark Gurhey is likely to try and bring the ball out of defense on a more frequent basis than a player without this trait might. It doesn't mean that someone that doesn't have this trait doesn't know how to bring the ball out of defense or won't. It just means that Mark Gurhey is likely to do it. Now, player traits can be both positive and negative for many reasons. For example, this might counteract something that you're doing in your tactic that you don't want Mark Gurhey to do, which might make it a negative thing for you. And on the other side of that, you might want your centre-backs to bring the ball out of defence, meaning that this is a positive trait. Now, some traits seem to have bigger effects in the in-game engine than others. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about that later, and sometimes Gurhey might do this at the right time, and sometimes he might do it at the wrong time. It's all determined by his decision-making. The better his decision-making, the more likely he is to make the right decision about when or when not to activate this trait, if you want to call it that way. Now, different positions on the pitch have different traits. Of course, Joshua Zirkzee, being a striker, is not going to have the brings ball out of defense trait because he's not a defender. Instead, he'll have more striker-based traits like playing with his back to goal. Some traits are more universal, of course, like avoiding using a player's weaker foot. That could be your right back, it could be your left winger, it could be a central midfielder. Some traits can go across all positions, and of course, your midfielders, your wingers, and fullbacks can all have unique traits to their game. Now, like I mentioned at the start, some traits can make an average player great, and some traits can make a great player feel like they're average in the in-game engine. Now, there's a couple of reasons for this. One is that some player traits are just better in-game than others in terms of getting results on the pitch in Football Manager. As with any game, like let's say FIFA, finesse shots some years are really good and chip shots are good other years. It's the same in FM on most occasions. There's just certain things that tend to work in the Football Manager engine. And the second thing that's going to make a player either perform better or worse due to a trait is how it suits your tactic. For example, Joshua Zirkzee here likes to play with his back to goal and likes the ball played into his feet. So he wants to be the man that has his back against the defence to receive a ball, turn out, and then he's got great passing, vision, and technique to play players in. However, in this tactic, we're looking to use him as an advanced forward, and for that reason, he might not be the best player for this tactic, or we might need to make a tactical change because some of his traits are kind of going to counteract what we want Zirkzee to do. Take Michael Olise, for example. If we put him on the right wing here, he's a player who likes to cut inside from both wings, and that fits perfectly with what we're trying to do in this tactic of having an inverted winger. But if we were playing, say, an actual out-and-out winger on the right-hand side, and we added an additional instruction to say we want him to stay out wide longer, there you go, we've selected run wide with the ball. Now, when you have that, you'll see there's a notification here that's telling us that it's actually affected by the player trait. Michael Olise Eze inherently wants to cut inside from the wing due to his player traits, and this is going to affect our tactic. So you do definitely need to consider your tactic when thinking of player traits. But how do you get player traits on a player? How do you remove certain ones? It's pretty simple. If we go to Joshua Zertsky, let's keep using him as an example, and we go to development and then training, near where you can select your additional focus and your position duty, you can choose discuss new trait as well for a player to add a trait onto their game. You will see discuss new trait was blanked out a second ago. That's because Joshua Zertsky was on holiday at the end of the season, so I've gone back to an earlier point in the save file so you can see when this option is available. When a player is here and training at the club, you can discuss new trait, you can speak to your staff members. When you speak to a staff member, whichever one you choose, you'll get a few options of movement training, passing training, finishing training, defending training, and technique training. Let's take movement for example. If we go there, we have a bunch of suggestions that we can make and ask our assistant about, whether we want Joshua Zertsky to dribble around the left flank on a regular basis, dribble down the right, dribble through the middle, move into channels, whatever it might be. We've got all the options here, and when you click one, let's say move into channels, you'll get some feedback from your coaches. Sometimes they'll say that's a great idea, sometimes they'll say it's a bad idea, and sometimes in this case he's already saying Joshua Zertsky has got too many traits to his game. Now you can either say, yeah, you're right coach, we're not going to do that, or you can go over his head and ask for it to be trained anyway. But it's always a good idea to take this information on board, because sometimes they'll give you information about when a trait might work and when it might not, and that is all down to a player's attributes. Take Abere Eze for example. He's playing as a Mazzala in our team, but I want him to score more goals. So a player trait that I really like for that is arriving late into the area. So if we go to development and then training and then go discuss new trait, let's go to attacking, and again I think this one is in movement. Here you go, I want him to arrive late into the opposition area wherever possible. We'll then get some feedback about why this may or may not work for Eze. Alan Russell, our coach, is saying it's a trait that suits players with acceleration, which isn't one of his strengths. So we can take that on board, we can say no to that, we can rethink. And that's how traits work. Certain attributes determine how well a player is going to use a certain trait. Of course, decision making plays a factor, like we mentioned earlier. Similarly, Eze has got 15 passing, 15 vision, and 16 technique. So maybe asking for some kind of passing training for him, where he plays killer balls, might be something that actually suits him. It's not something that I want to put on him personally, but we'll use it as an example. Let's ask him to try using killer balls, and as you can see, because he has got good attributes in those areas, we're being told by Alan Russell that that is something that's going to help him. Now you can see tries killer balls often is being added to our player traits list, and over time he is going to hopefully learn that trait. On the same note, if you want to take a player trait off, we can go to training, and then we can talk again about movement. If we want to go to the mental coach, movement training, we're going to look for that back to goal one that Zertsy's got. I would like him to stop trying to play with his back to goal as often as possible. They're going to tell me whether it's a good idea or bad idea, but that just shows you how you can, if you want to, ask for a trait to be removed. Instead of you being able to ask to add that trait to a player, if they already have it, the option will be instead to remove them in the same section that it was before. So now you know the basics of traits, how to add them, how to remove them, how they can affect you tactically as well, but which are the best traits to use in game. Of course, this is all situational and it depends on how you want your players to play, but there are some that definitely stand out to me playing FM, and hopefully you'll find they have great success for you as well. Firstly, we'll look at defenders, particularly centre-backs. I really do think traits you'll see will have the biggest effect on players further up the pitch, but in defence, particularly if you're looking to play as a ball-playing defender, having a player that likes to try long-range passes can be extremely beneficial if you're trying to play an expansive range of football, particularly when you've got a player like Joachim Andersen with 16 passing, great vision, and technique also. That's something that's really going to benefit his game. I also like brings ball out of defence. Mark Gurr, he had that, as we noticed in that example earlier, and that's something that can really benefit a defender's game if he is a good ball-playing defender, someone that's confident on the ball, whether that be dribbling. Of course, passing is going to be useful as well. His decision-making, his composure, all of that is going to play a role in whether he is good at bringing the ball out of defence. But I tend to find those kind of traits are extremely effective if you're trying to play an expansive range of football, playing out the back. On the same end, if you've got a player that's maybe a no-nonsense centre-back with 6 passing and 6 vision, you're not going to see great results from a trait like tries tries long-range passes, for example. So think about that when you're choosing your traits. Every player is unique, every player is different, so make sure you're not just trying to force a good trait on a player that definitely can't use it. One negative trait that I don't like, and I know Harry Maguire has it, so I've gone to him as an example, is dwells on the ball. If I was his manager, I would try and train that out of him. Obviously, as a 31-year-old, it's pretty unlikely I'm going to be able to completely change how Maguire plays, but dwells on the ball for me isn't something that I particularly want. Maybe if you're looking to really retain possession, you know, Roberto De Zerbi style thing where you're inviting the press, whatever it might be, that could be a good idea for you. But for me, I don't want a player just to sit on the ball in defence. I think it often is going to lead to mistakes, and I'd rather him not have that trait. On the same note, something like avoids using weaker foot doesn't seem to be the best idea for someone like Harry Maguire, who's actually got a fairly strong left foot, so we're reducing his ability to play as an either-footed defender by asking him to never use his left. I would also be trying to remove that from his game as well. I'm not saying that's a particularly bad trait. Of course, with a player with a really weak left or right foot, that could be a good idea, but it just shows you how every player is an individual basis, and you need to look at them, look at their traits, and decide if they really work for you and what you're looking for. Now, if we're talking about a deep-lying midfielder, someone that maybe likes to play as a 6 in your team behind the 2 central midfielders or whatever shape you might have, then I really like dictates tempo and also tries long-range passes like we have with our defenders Anderson that we looked at earlier. This player also has brings ball out of defence as well, for an example, so he's the kind of player who's going to receive the ball, low down the pitch, and then try and play a long-range pass. What I like more than the long-range pass trait, though, is tries killer passes, which we looked at earlier with Eze. I find if you've got a player with great passing, vision, and technique, you'll get some great results out of that, and plenty of assists, particularly when combined with players with other traits that we'll cover a little bit later, and I'll re-mention that again down the line. If you've got a slightly more progressive thinking midfielder who likes to score goals from midfield, I definitely think arriving into the box late is something that can really help you. If you've got a number 10 who's maybe trying to cut open a defence, again, tries killer balls is going to be very effective. I know a lot of people have said they like the trait of plays 1-2s, particularly if you're playing a tiki-taka version of football. That's always a nice player trait to have if that's the kind of style of play that you want. But one thing you should definitely note is you don't want too many makeups of the same kind of player in your team. For example, if you had 3 central midfielders and all of them had tries killer balls often on, you're going to lose the ball a lot, because a lot of the time the killer ball isn't going to work. It will on some occasions, but the idea of them trying that is that it's a risky De Bruyne level pass. But if you've got 3 central midfielders all trying to do it all the time, there's a good chance it won't work a lot. They'll give the ball away, so you really need to make sure you've got the right balance in your team. Someone that maybe likes to dictate tempo, someone that maybe likes to run with the ball, maybe another player that likes to try killer passes. That way you've got a nice mix of everything in your midfield. When it comes to players on the wings, I definitely have a few favourites. If you have a player that wants to cut in as maybe as an inverted winger or an inside forward, having the trait of cutting inside from that particular wing, or in this case, both wings, is definitely going to be beneficial to your game, and it's a very nice option to have as a player trait. My favourite though, particularly if you're using an inside forward on the left hand side, is to look for something called moves into channels. That will be in the movement training. If you've got an inside forward who likes to move into channels, you'll find it often disrupts the defence of the opposition, whether it helps that player score more goals, or alternatively it might drag players away to that player in the channel, giving more space for your striker in your team. So that is a great one, moves into channels. If you've got a player on the wing as well who's got really good pace and acceleration, knocking a ball past an opponent can be really effective. Timo Werner, for example, I believe is someone that has that trait of knocking a ball past a player. 18 acceleration, 17 pace. You could see why that might work for him. So when it comes to wide players, I really do like moves into channels, and there's some other favourites that I did cover there that can be particularly effective. But where you see player traits shine the most is definitely when it comes to your strikers, particularly their finishing and movement styles. Let's start with the shot types. Now, players like Lewandowski are great examples of this, players with brilliant finishing and technique. Now, if you've got a player that has those two things, as well as good decision making and composure, likes to lob goalkeeper, is particularly effective. It was last year in FM23, it will be this year in FM24 as well, from what I've seen. That doesn't mean they're chipping it from outside the box, but when they get one-on-one, you'll often see them just dinking it over the goalkeeper. It's always an effective way to score. Places shots is actually one that I've never been a massive fan of. That's for a player that's got really good finishing and technique, who's going to just find the corner, doesn't have to put much power behind it. Only the elite level strikers, I think, places shots particularly helps. One of my favourites is try shots first time. I've found if you've got a natural goal scorer, that can really help them. Some other things to note as well, I've had strikers in the past with terrible terrible finishing, but good long shots. You can ask them to shoot from distance more often. That will definitely help them. Another one that's really beneficial is if you've got a quick player who maybe isn't the best finisher, but also has really good dribbling, ask them to try and round the goalkeeper. That is one that can be really effective in Football Manager, has been for years. If you've got that player that has 10 finishing, but 18 dribbling as a striker, asking them to round the goalkeeper will actually likely lead to more goals for you, as they just go round the goalkeeper in a one-on-one situation and they're able to tap it into an empty net. Even with 10 finishing, they'll at least be able to do that. Now, a lot of the time though, these chances won't arise unless a player has the right movement. We mentioned move into channels earlier. That is a great one, but if you've got a player that's got any kind of pace behind him, Lewandowski maybe not the best example, but likes to beat the offside trap, that's a particularly overpowered trait that I've found in the past. They'll use their pace and their decision making to quickly beat the defence just as a ball is going over the top, leaving them one-on-one on a lot of opportunities. And this is where I mentioned earlier that combining player traits can really help. If you have a player that maybe has great pace and dribbling and you ask him to try and beat the offside trap and then develop a way for him to try and round the goalkeeper, you'll get so many goals of balls over the top and then running past, beating the defence and going around the goalie for an empty net. If you combine that as well with other player traits, for example a midfielder that's got tries killer balls often, he's going to try a killer ball whilst your attacker is going to try and beat the offside trap, and it's going to lead to a combination that's going to help you get so many more goals. So we've pretty much covered everything you need to know about traits, the best ones, the worst ones, when to use them, how your tactic affects it, how to add them and remove them, pretty much everything covered. But there's one final thing I want to talk about with player traits, and it's all about young players and wonder kids. Now, particularly when a player comes out of your youth intake at the age of 16, 17, they're very malleable, both in terms of their position and their player traits, and they're actually likely to learn traits a little bit quicker than an older player may. Now, what I want you to do in your next save when you get a youth intake, it doesn't have to be for every player, but just the ones that look promising enough that they might have a role in your first team, is take a look at them. As much as you might try and choose a new position for them and whatnot, look at their player traits early on. Sometimes you'll see that this player is obviously very gifted at passing, for example, and you want to give them a passing trait, or what I really want you to look for is traits that they actually come into your game with that you might want to get rid of. For example, we've got Sam Swanson, who's a striker here, and I'm noticing that he likes to pass rather than attempting to score. Now, for me, a striker that doesn't want to shoot, that's a little bit strange, but then you look and it kind of makes sense as the kind of player that he is. With 6 finishing, he's actually a better passer than he is a goal scorer, and this is where you can either say, you know what, we're going to work on his finishing and remove that trait, or you can identify early on that maybe he isn't the best striker. Maybe we should be training him as a number 10. If he's never going to be a goal scorer, then we might want to change his position, and that's what I want you to do. Just check out a player's player traits early on, decide if they need to be removed, if anything needs to be added. Now, if he did have this trait, but he actually had 13 finishing at the age of 16, I'd go, you know what, let's get rid of that trait straight away. I want him to try and shoot when he gets the opportunity. So it's definitely worth doing, looking at your young players, whether they're academy players or wonder kids that you've bought, add traits onto them early whilst they're under the age of 21 or so, and hopefully they'll learn that trait a little bit quicker than an older player may, and you might completely change the course of that player's career. So there you go, that's player traits, how to turn your players from average players into overpowered beasts. Get a striker who likes to beat the offside trap and maybe lob the goalkeeper, have a midfielder that's going to play killer balls, a defender that's going to bring the ball out of defence. Your team will play so much more smoothly, I promise you that. Thank you for watching. Like the video if you did enjoy, and if you want to see more of this Palace save, you can find my channel linked in the description. I'll see you next time, guys. Goodbye.